There's something deeply unsettling about the idea that our history books might be missing entire chapters. I'm not talking about minor footnotes or obscure details. I'm talking about beings that towered over ordinary humans, civilizations that thrived and vanished, and evidence that mysteriously disappeared from museum archives. Today, we're diving into one of the most suppressed topics in American archaeology: the giants who once walked this continent. When giants walked among us. Let me take you back to September 20th, 1519. Ferdinand Magellan is setting sail from a Spanish port with 5 ships and a crew full of ambition. His goal? Find a western route to India. What he didn't expect was to encounter beings that would challenge everything Europeans thought they knew about the world. Fast forward 3 years, only 1 ship returns. 18 survivors out of hundreds. Most refused to talk about what they'd seen. But one man, Antonio Pigafetta, kept a journal. And what he wrote in that journal is absolutely fascinating. While sailing along the coast of what we now call Argentina, Magellan's crew discovered something extraordinary. Huge footprints in the sand. Footprints that belonged to people who towered over the average European sailor. Pigafetta describes meeting a man who was literally twice the height of a normal person, dancing, singing, seemingly coming from nowhere. We reached only to his waist, Pigafetta wrote. Think about that for a second. Imagine standing next to someone and only coming up to their waist. That's not just tall. That's something else entirely. Magellan called them Patagons, the big-footed ones. And that's why that region is still called Patagonia today. But here's the thing, it's giant. Inhabitants? All gone. The pattern emerges. Now, you might think this was just one isolated incident, maybe an exaggeration by sailors who'd been at sea too long. But the accounts don't stop there. They keep coming from different explorers, different decades, different parts of the continent. In 1579, a chaplain in Francis Drake's expedition encountered the same Patagonian giants. He calculated their height at 7 feet 5 inches. 15 years later, an English sailor named Anthony Knivet was shown. Corpses of men measuring 12 feet tall. 12 feet. That's the height of a basketball hoop. The last confirmed sighting came in 1766 when Commodore John Byron reported seeing a tribe of 9-foot-tall natives. But here's where it gets suspicious. Later editions of his book were changed. Suddenly these giants measured only 6 feet 6 inches. Tall, sure, but not giants. Someone didn't want the truth getting out. A continent of giants. While Magellan was circumnavigating the globe, Spanish explorer Alonso Alvarez de Pineda was mapping the Gulf of Mexico. In what's now Texas, he encountered something remarkable. Tribes of vastly different sizes living in close proximity. Some are unusually small, others were average, and some, they measured 10 to 11 palms in height, over 3 meters tall. Pineda was so amazed that he named a river after them, Rio de los Palmas. A cartographer later labeled it Rio de Gigantes, Giants River. We know it today as the Rio Grande. Then there's the story of Chief Tuscaloosa. When Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto met him in 1542, he was stunned. While Tuscaloosa's people were the same height as the Spaniards, the chief himself was enormous, a true giant. De Soto, driven by greed, took the chief hostage. Bad move. Tuscaloosa freed himself and ordered an attack that killed most of the Spanish force. After the battle, his people searched the ruins but never found Tuscaloosa's body. He simply vanished. The Native American perspective. Here's what makes this whole thing even more compelling. Native American tribes have their own stories about giants, and they're not celebrating them as heroes. They're describing them as enemies. Tribes across North America, the Chippewa, Sandusky, Tawa, and Paiute, all tell remarkably similar stories. They describe ancient wars against races of giants, wars they eventually won. And here's the detail that keeps showing up These giants had white skin and red hair. Some legends mention two races of giants, one with red hair and beards, the other with black hair and beards. The Paiute have an especially vivid legend about the Si-Te-Cah, red-haired giants who terrorized their ancestors. These weren't gentle giants from fairy tales. They were cannibals who hunted humans. Eventually, the Paiutes had enough. They cornered the remaining Si-Te-Cah in a cave and set fire to the entrance, entombing them forever. For years, historians dismissed this as folklore, just stories told around campfires. Until 1911, the Lovelock cave discovery. Two miners in Nevada were extracting bat guano from a cave when they started finding strange artifacts. Then, deeper in the cave, they found something incredible: mummies. Giant mummies, with red hair still attached to their skulls. And the cave entrance? Blackened by fire, exactly as the Paiute legend described. The University of California sent archaeologists. They found textiles, pottery, stones with unknown inscriptions, and mummies measuring between 6 and 8 feet tall. The shorter ones were likely juveniles. Most of these artifacts ended up in museums. But the mummies? They vanished. The university claimed the excavators never left a proper inventory, which seems pretty convenient for professional archaeologists. A second expedition in 1924 found more artifacts, including beautifully crafted duck decoys made from tule reeds. Major museums refused to accept them. They ended up forgotten in a small Arizona museum until 1984, when they were finally carbon dated. Result? Over 2,000 years old, matching the timeline from Paiute oral history perfectly. The Spirit Cave mummies. In 1940, archaeologists discovered Spirit Cave in Nevada, containing two more giant mummies, a male and a female, carefully wrapped and placed on woven mats. The newspapers barely covered it. The mummies were forgotten for decades. Then in 1996, a researcher decided to carbon date them using new technology. The result? 10,000 years old. That's older than any human habitation was supposed to exist in that region. Even stranger, the mummies appeared to be of Caucasian origin, with cranial features resembling Nordic peoples. Before this information could become widely known, the Bureau of Land Management seized the mummies, claiming they needed to be returned to the Paiute tribe. We've never seen them since. The Viking connection. So where did these red-haired, white-skinned giants come from? Here's a theory. 500 years before Columbus, Viking captain Leif Erikson landed in what's now Newfoundland. Some sagas mention encounters with massive, hairy men with black eyes who towered over the Norsemen. And these were men who already stood nearly 7 feet tall themselves. Could some Vikings have stayed, interbred with native populations? This might explain why North Dakota's Manda tribe has red hair and blue eyes. It might explain the red-haired giant mummies found across Nevada and beyond. Abraham Lincoln knew. In 1848, a young Abraham Lincoln visited Niagara Falls. Overwhelmed by the timelessness of the scene, he wrote something fascinating in his notebook. He mentioned that species of extinct giants whose bones fill the mounds of America as casually as he mentioned Columbus and Moses. Nobody who read this at the time would have been surprised. Everyone knew about the giants. Their bones were in museums, including the Smithsonian. So what happened to all that evidence? The Great Cover-Up. Between 1879 and 1902, something changed at the Smithsonian. Major John Wesley Powell became chief and appointed Cyrus Thomas to run the Eastern Mound Division. Thomas was an isolationist. He believed Native American cultures evolved independently, with no outside contact. Giant skeletons and red-haired mummies didn't fit that narrative. Reports of giant finds kept coming in, and the Smithsonian kept acquiring them. Then they'd disappear. An 8-foot mummy from San Diego, purchased for the equivalent of $14,000 today, then destroyed as a hoax. A giant skeleton from Iowa crumbled to dust when Exposed to air, convenient. A 7-foot body in full metal armor from Oklahoma. The entire burial chamber was supposedly destroyed with dynamite. The pattern is undeniable. What this all means. Look, I'm not saying I have all the answers, but when you see this many eyewitness accounts from credible sources, when you see archaeological evidence that keeps mysteriously disappearing, when you see institutions actively suppressing information, you have to wonder what they're so afraid of. The evidence suggests that giants weren't just mythological creatures. They were real. They lived across this continent. They fought wars, built civilizations, and eventually disappeared, either wiped out or absorbed into other populations. Maybe the real question isn't whether giants existed. Maybe it's why we've been so determined to forget them. The truth is out there, buried in earthen mounds, hidden in museum archives, and written in journals collecting dust.